Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Good Book Club. This is our April meeting on Sunday, April the 14th, and we have a really excellent book that we are discussing today. Let's go to our first slide. We always start our book club meetings by reading our book club mission statement, and we have book club member Melissa, who has volunteered to do that.
The Good Book Club was created to bring together nuanced Mormons, post-Mormons, and others with a shared interest in Mormonism. We are introspective, critical thinkers seeking to learn, connect, and build relationships through the catalyst of literature. We welcome all who are searching for a safe space to share authentic feelings, thoughts, feelings, and ideas through open dialogue and shared experiences relative to Mormon culture. As we deconstruct previous beliefs, we encourage all to find happiness in the process of discovering new religious ideologies, spirituality, and life philosophies.
Oh, thanks, Melissa. That's excellent. All right. We always have a couple little announcements at the beginning before we get to our actual presentation, some upcoming events. We are still working our way through Uncultured. I helped John DeLynn run his Mormon Stories book club, and this is going to be the book that we're going to be talking to the author, Daniela, in May. So if you guys want to grab a copy of that, start reading. I will let you know when that's going to be on Mormon Stories. It'll be a regular Mormon Stories podcast. So you'll be able to interact in the chat with Daniela. It is a fascinating and disturbing book that I know you guys will all really relate to. So really good. Grab a copy of that. Another book that kind of came on my radar, I was in contact with the author, is called American Trinity and Other Stories from the Mormon Corridor. This is more from a nuanced, kind of faithful perspective, but really interesting takes on Mormonism. And we are probably going to be talking to the author, David Pace, at some point. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of that. Let's look at our next book. Oh, you've probably already heard of this. She was on, Alyssa was on Mormon Stories to tell her Mormon story. She's only recently left the church, and she's written this amazing book, How to Leave the Mormon Church, an Ex-Mormon's Guide to Rebuilding After Religion. I had the chance to meet her at Thrive. She's just wonderful. So we are going to be talking to her on Mormonish and putting out a podcast where all of us can interact in the chat with her. So everybody grab this book and watch her Mormon story, and we'll let you know probably end of May is when we're going to be putting hers out. But really interesting take. She's younger, so she has that younger perspective, but definitely a focus on rebuilding, which all of us, we can all use all the advice and help we can get, right? So that's a good one. This book, brand new, just out 2 days ago. You will be on the cutting edge if you pick this up. It's called How the Book of Mormon Came to Pass, the Second Greatest Show on Earth. This is written by Lars Nielsen. That name might sound familiar to you. This is the brother of David Nielsen, Ensign Peak whistleblower. Lars is actually the one who leaked all of the information out to the press. When David was a little more reticent to do it, Lars went ahead and did it. So after all of that, he decided to turn his attention and his scholarly knowledge on the Book of Mormon. And his theories, we just finished a podcast with him. This is going to be out this Tuesday, April 16th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. It's going to be airing as if it was live. There will be a live chat, meaning you can get in there and you can ask him questions. This is going to be something, I don't even know how to describe it, but this is going to make an impact, and this is going to change a lot of things. It's available on all formats, Kindle, audio, everywhere. If you're interested, this is I think, going to blow the lid off quite a few things.
It's not on audio yet.
It's not. I said, I thought, okay, it's not on audio, but it is on Kindle. That's right. So yeah, but I know he actually said he's working on the audio right now as we speak. So anyway, check out our podcast on Tuesday night. Also, of course, Letting Go by Lisa. Hopefully by now everybody has had a chance to read this. We are going to be talking to her too. I know our schedule moves around so much, but this is an amazing, amazing book. I read it several months ago and can't recommend it highly enough. So everybody grab a copy of that too. Here's another really important thing, talking about books. I don't know for those of you that are new, if you know this, but we only read what we want to read. So if you have a book that you love, that you've read over the last year or so, or even prior to that, nominate this book. You can do that on our Facebook page. There is a link at the top under the featured tab that says nominations, or you can just text me or email me at thegoodbookclub@mail.com. But start giving us your suggestions, because we all vote on what we want to read, because it's no fun if we don't get to read what we want to read. And I know you guys are really voracious readers, and I'm really excited for next year. So we'll be putting those together, and then we will be choosing the new books, and that list will be available in August as we start September. All right. We're going to cover this more at the end, but the next book, the book for May, which is going to be on May 19th. Now, that's a difference from our typical second Sunday. I'm sure you know why. Mother's Day. We can't take people away on Mother's Day, or they would not like the Good Book Club. So it's going to be on the 19th. It's The Chaos Machine by Max Fisher, and my cousin Brad Farmer is going to be leading this. He is going to be telling us more about this book at the end of our discussion. So I think that covers all of our announcements. We will now move on to our book of the month, Guns, Germs, and Steel. We've been trying to do this book for 4 years. Here we are, and we've got the wonderful Bruce Christensen leading the discussion. Take it away, Bruce.
Hi, everybody. Let's see. Let me just start sharing. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, so Guns, Germs, and Steel. I read it a few years ago. It helped me understand, more about the world. As I've mentioned many times before, we were taught a certain narrative of how the world works, and this is one of the books that helped me kind of get a better understanding of how the world works. And so let's see. I've got a problem here. Okay. Okay, so this is Jared Diamond. He's the author. Right now, he's 86 years old. He did his undergraduate at Harvard, and he did his PhD at Cambridge, Trinity College, Cambridge in England. He's currently a professor of geography at UCLA. And in 1998, he won the Pulitzer Prize for general nonfiction for the book Guns, Germs, and Steel. And his fields that he's taught in and researched in are physiology, biophysics, ornithology, environmental science, history, ecology, geography, evolutionary biology, and anthropology. These are some of the awards he had. The MacArthur Genius Grant, the Phi Beta Kappa Science Award, and then 1998, he received the Pulitzer Prize for the book we're discussing, National Medal of Science, Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement, Royal Society Prize for Science Books in 3 different years, and the Wolf Prize in Agriculture. And here's the books that he's written. The Third Chimpanzee, which I kind of want to read, Guns, Germs, and Steel. And the one that I kind of was surprised, Why Sex is Fun, The Evolution of Human Sexuality. And he wrote that in the same year that he did Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's a popular topic among the book club. Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. That may be a book that we want to add to our possible reading list. Natural Experiments in History, The World Until Yesterday, and Upheaval, How Nations Cope with Crisis and Change. And I kind of think that's a fairly recent book, and I kind of think that might be a nice topic too for the book club. So basically, this book argues that environmental factors such as geography, the availability of domesticable plants and animals, the spread of germs have played a crucial role in determining which societies have been able to develop advanced technologies, complex political systems, and successful economies. He challenges the traditional explanations for why some societies have dominated others, suggesting that it is not due to inherent differences in intelligence or capacity, but rather environmental and geographic advantages. Okay, so this was written in 1997. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 1998. the understanding of science and everything has progressed a lot in the last 27 years. Examples, the Human Genome Project, CRISPR, gene theory, AI, climate science, quantum computing, neuroscience. The critics over the years have three basic criticisms of this book. Simplifications. Critics argue that Diamond oversimplifies the complex process of human history. Eurocentrism concentrates on Eurasia as the driver of historical success. And environmental determinism, emphasis on geography and environmental factors as the primary drivers of societal development, and neglects the agency of human societies and downplays the role of culture, politics, and individual agency. When I read that, I'm going like, okay, we read Free Will by Sam Harris that kind of thinks that we have much less agency than everyone feels that they have. So I thought that was an interesting crossover between our reading. And so for our discussion today, we're going to just go over some of the basic concepts, and we'll do this with the grid view with everybody on. Just raise your hands. But how has the central thesis of this book changed your view on how the world works after reading it? And then I think for all of us, how does the central thesis of this book differ from the narrative of how the world works as we were taught by the Mormon Church? So that's kind of what I wanted us to talk about. And Rebecca, using her AI skills, did some examples of guns, germs, and steel. And, this is reminiscent of the Spanish arrival in the Americas. Okay. Now I'm going to go to let's see. Grid view. Okay. Oops, let's see. I'm just finding out that I have a different view when I'm sharing.
Yeah, it looks okay to us, Bruce. Did you want to, were we supposed to answer those questions, the first ones that you had, or?
No, this is just kind of the general, let's see. I'm finding it interesting that I can't see my slides and see everyone in the picture. So we've got the whole view correct.
Yeah, we can let you know, Bruce, if
Yeah, you just go ahead with your presentation and we'll keep an eye on the hands, and we can let you know who's raising them if you can't see it. So
okay, so yeah, you'll have to do that because when I share, it doesn't show me who is doing. Okay, so I just wanted to, the Mormon cultures explains wealth, power, and prosperity, and it attributes it often to righteousness in the pre-existence, chosen people, light skin is superior to dark skin, hard work. What was your experience in how different people prospered or were powerful? I know, my patriarchal blessing said that I have, in the pre-existence, I chose my parents, which isn't Mormon doctrine. Landon?
yeah, I was going to say, growing up in the 70s, it was very much taught to me that because you were white, you'd been, you'd made the right decisions in heaven, that dark people were being punished, light people were, more intelligent almost. and that's why God blessed them to rule over the other races. This book really put it in perspective to me because I realized that it was really just a fluke of where you were located on a continent and what direction the continent was turned, that it was running more lengthwise than north south. It was running east west, which allowed for so many things, and the fact that they had draft animals, and it really gave you a unique advantage because of the situation of simply where you were born at, and then of course deserts on how plants could cross a desert or not. If you had a desert between you and the other area, that would have an impact. So this was one of the books, to me, when I left the church. Well, no, I hadn't left the church. I was actually doing a in-depth study trying to deconstruct things, and this is one of the books that I read, and this is one of the books that changed the way I saw everything. Probably *Sapiens* and this book were two of the big ones for me, because it put in perspective to me how there's no way that what the Book of Mormon described ever happened, because the world that existed in that time period did not have all of the things that were described in the book. And it put into perspective to me how much advantage it was just being born in a certain area or having access to other humans to share information with, whereas Australia, North and South America were kind of limited. They were blocked off. They couldn't share information as well as Eurasia could. So for me, this was a game-changing book.
Great, thank you. Lynette.
You're muted, Lynette.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm definitely in the realm of when I was totally in the church. I truly believed that I had been specially blessed and that I had been born under conditions that I could, have a pretty good lifestyle, that I had been born under conditions where I was born in the church, and that was an extra blessing. And I don't know that this book in particular changed that for me. I originally read this probably about 25 years ago, so shortly after it was published, but I reread it again a couple of months ago, and definitely looking at the way Mormonism wants you to view the world and the way that scientists have figured out the world is, there are two very distinct things. And I think it's wrong to go around with this idea that, I'm better than you are because I was born in this condition. And that's something that I think the Mormon Church helped me to have, is this superiority idea, which is totally wrong. So thank goodness that this book and others have helped us understand differently.
Yeah, great, thank you. Well, going on to some of the basic themes, as Landon mentioned, the kind of east-west axis of Europe and Asia, and the north-south axis of the Americas and Africa. Basically, east-west had similar climate zones, so that crops, domesticated animals, and technology could spread more easily from Asia to Europe, because it's an extremely large landmass. Where in the Americas, north-south, something developed in South America, and animals that were domesticated, like the llama, couldn't pass through the Isthmus of Panama very well because of the tropics, because of just the geography. In Mesoamerica, they developed, corn, and that didn't easily spread north and south. And so, again, we also have Australia as a very unique set of plants and animals and technology, because it was, for the most part, an island set off from everywhere else. And so everything developed differently. I animals listed in the Book of Mormon, not in the Americas at the time of the Nephites. This was, before I heard the term historicity in the Book of Mormon, when I was listening to Mormon Stories podcast, I had no idea that, horses were native to the Americas, but they became extinct about 10,000 years ago and were reintroduced by the Spanish. My understanding is they hypothesized that once large amounts of humans came to the Americas, they hunted many of the large animals to extinction, the horses, mammoths, just a lot of things that weren't around at the time of the Book of Mormon. Book of Mormon mentions silk. Silk wasn't brought until the Spanish. Cattle weren't native to the Americas, sheep, pigs, all of this stuff. And I guess it kind of reinforces my view that the Book of Mormon, it was very much a 19th century understanding of the world and history at that time. So I just thought, anybody have any other thoughts about how did you kind of realize that there were anachronisms with the animals in the Americas when the Book of Mormon, when you were reading the Book of Mormon or teaching gospel doctrine or anything like that? Melissa.
I had no clue. I knew nothing about anything like that. And I thought it was interesting when I was talking to my husband about it, because that thing where you leave and then you like have to like blow it at everybody. And I did that, unfortunately. And so I was like, did you know like about the horses and about the steel and like all of these different things? Because my mind was blown and I had no idea. But apparently he did know about it. And so he has this view of, well, they just haven't found it yet. Like, just because you can't find it doesn't mean it didn't happen. And so, for me, whose mind was completely blown because I had never heard anything about it, versus him who had heard about it, does know about it, and is still making a space for it. I was just like, what, you know about this stuff and you didn't tell me? Like, yeah, it was kind of a shock to me.
Yep. Landon.
I knew about the horses, that was questionable, but this just blew the lid off everything when I started thinking about all the different crop packages and, how what I should have been seeing in the Book of Mormon that I wasn't. I should have been seeing maize. I should have been seeing squash. I should have been seeing beans. I shouldn't have been seeing wheat. I shouldn't have been seeing barley. I shouldn't have been seeing the crops that they were describing. So for me, it was both what wasn't there and what should be there. And this book actually got me thinking, and I've been trying to find somebody to come to a podcast on this, but we have the genetics on the humans, saying that the humans in North and South America, came across the land bridge. The church has this excuse of bottlenecking and the genes of the Semitic people left, but there's genes, and he talked about that in here in the plants and in the animals. They also have DNA, and you can track where potatoes came from. You can track where wheat came from. You can track where corn came from. And by tracking it, we can see it did not come over thousands of years ago. It came over after the 1500s. And so I'm trying to find someone who can cover that and go over the DNA of the plants and over the DNA of the animals, because you can argue bottlenecking with 30 people, but you can't argue bottlenecking of all their crops, all their animals. That would be there, and that's not being found either. So for me, this just really blew everything open with the different plants and animals packages.
Yeah, exactly. Mylene, you're muted.
It's interesting to me that part of the confusion I had was, I remember being in fourth grade and going to the La Brea tar pits, and they had, skeletons of horses there. So later on, when I was in high school, just before I joined the church, somebody mentions horses in the Book of Mormon. I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. And then there was the issue of, when they talk about grains and stuff, in the Bible, I think it mentions corn in the King James version, but it wasn't corn. Corn hadn't gotten to Europe by that point. They were talking about wheat in Europe, but they were calling it by a different name. And so at that time when I was joining the church, I thought, yeah, people make mistakes. They call something one thing when it's really something else. And I just kind of blew it off. So I don't know. I mean, that kind of confusion that existed and seems to be going away as we get more and more scientific knowledge and stuff, was one of the things the church had going for it when it was doing all the proselyting back, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, stuff like that.
Great, thanks. Jackie.
Yeah, I think that this book, what it really pointed out to me was there were things that in the 70s and 80s that we were still like, there was so much, we didn't have the technology, so we could still wait for those things to be discovered, right? We were still waiting for things to be found in Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador that would prove the historicity of the Book of Mormon, right? And also growing up, I was always taught, don't question it. I think a lot of us were taught that, right? Don't question it, just go with you, just go along with it. And that was really kind of like, so when you encountered these anomalies, they were like, okay, well, there's something else going on here. Don't question it, just go along with it. And those of us that are old enough, pre-internet and everything, we didn't have all of the tools to be able to look it up and find it for ourselves, right? That we can now. So the other thing that I'm finding now that is when reading this book is that the Book of Mormon should not have in any way, shape, or form existed in the civilizations that are described in there, right? They should have been on the verge of like hunter-gatherer farmers. Like we went to the Fremont Indian State Park right before we went to the Manti Temple open house a couple of weeks ago. They should have been on that verge of just like part hunter-gatherers, part farming. And they shouldn't have had these huge civilizations and all of that. And because of where the whole thing was in the relationship to where the world was at this point. So and then there's also that whole John Lindwall and how they weren't as if they were as literate as they were, as the Book of Mormon says, then they shouldn't have, then we should be finding where they were all the written stuff. So this just went along with proving to me that what things were said in the Book of Mormon now were just too far ahead of the time frame, too far ahead of what the world was developing as to be real, to be true. And it just backs it up. It just backed it up more to me.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, here's just kind of a chart of domestication of plants. And I thought this was interesting. There's two things that kind of pop out at me is one, plants were being domesticated before the supposed time of Adam and Eve. Again, a problem with the narrative of the Book of Mormon and also the narrative of the Bible and the narrative of the Mormon Church with, believing that the Tower of Babel and the flood were literal events and stuff. So in Asia, you can see in Asia and Europe, wheat, peas, olives, rice, millet, sugarcane, bananas, sesame, eggplant, oats were all Eurasian. Africa had sorghum, which I still have to kind of look up. I'm not sure exactly what sorghum is. I don't recall ever having had it. African rice, yams, oil palm, tea, teff. I think that's a type of grain. But then when we get to the Americas, the potato, manioc, corn, beans, squash, sunflower, and you mentioned goosefoot, which I think is kind of a plant in the southeast. But another book that I'm proposing for our reading next year is 1493. A couple years ago, we read 1491, that was a description of the Americas before Columbus. And 1493 describes the Columbian Exchange, where the plants from the old world got introduced to the Americas, and the plants from the Americas got introduced to the New World. I think we don't have tomatoes, but tomatoes is in the Americas also. And who can imagine that Italian cuisine didn't have any tomatoes, before the discovery of the New World. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. And this also shows just kind of where things were domesticated. Strawberries in the Americas, I thought that was kind of interesting. But, corn, I mean, what a staple of the whole world now. But that was in the Americas. And as Landon mentioned, a lot of this stuff wasn't mentioned in the Book of Mormon that probably should have been mentioned in the Book of Mormon. And then a lot of stuff that was mentioned in the Book of Mormon didn't exist in the Americas. And so that's just another one of the anachronisms. And here specifically, wheat, barley, grapes, olive, fig, and cumin are mentioned in the Book of Mormon, which didn't exist in the Americas. So that again points out to me that it's a 19th century narrative. People have called it Bible fan fiction, and I think that makes a lot more sense to me than an exact narrative of the history of the Americas.
Hey, Bruce.
Yes.
Can you go back that slide? Because that kind of shows to me, if you look at where almost all of that stuff is, it is in that kind of middle latitude, right where he described where all the different plants come from. They're not coming from up north or down south. They really are right in the middle. There are a few, they're in South America, but for the most part, it's all right in that belt, right where he said it was, which it was something to me that really said, wow, what he's saying makes sense. You can see that everything's being founded in those climates.
Yeah, he brings this point. We'll discuss it towards the end. He wrote in 2017 a new afterword in the book that he kind of summarized some things. But yeah, the temperate zone is where plants and animals get domesticated easily. In the tropics, it's much harder because of the heat. And then in the Arctic, that's just its own challenge.
I was also surprised how nothing really seemed to come from Egypt, which we always think of as the breadbasket of the ancient world. But I didn't see anything that came from Egypt. It's almost like it all got passed down there.
I think Egypt was kind of at the fringe of the Fertile Crescent, where a lot of the, up through what is now Syria and Iraq and Iran, where a lot of domesticated crops started. And then, at least I know with my genealogy, like it says that genetically my family on both sides lived for a long time around the Black and Caspian Seas. And those were the farmers and stuff that came from the Middle East. And then they spent a lot of time there. And then they moved into Europe after the Ice Ages. I took my mom to Sweden about 15 or 20 years ago to visit family. And they're her second cousins. My great grandparents immigrated from Sweden in the 1880s on my mom's side. And we were able to visit the house my great grandfather was born in. And the original house was half house, half barn, where they lived with all the livestock right in the same house. And so Europeans spent a lot of time in close proximity with each other in the settlements and with animals. And that's where we get a lot of diseases that have jumped from animals to people. And measles, smallpox, influenza, mumps, typhus, whooping cough, diphtheria, and pertussis. Also, I kind of follow the genetic studies of the Black Death, and this geneticist from Germany has decoded the genome of the Black Death, or Yersinia pestis, which I think is interesting because now they can go back in these ancient cemeteries and figure it out if all these people that were buried all of a sudden at the same time died from the Black Death, which this is where science is advancing. And it was really interesting. 95% of the population of the Americas died of smallpox, measles, and flu. And my understanding is the great majority never came into contact personally with a European, that those diseases spread and stuff. So yeah, the guns, germs, and steel. Germs, I think, has had a big effect on things. Now, I've got some friends going on a trip to the islands of the South Pacific, Palau, and I was talking to them, and they were having to get yellow fever shots. I had to get a yellow fever shot for my mission in Chile, which is very much like Southern California. I had to have typhoid, malaria and stuff. You've got to be vaccinated because we don't have natural um, um, resistance. And then, it listed the routine vaccinations, MMR, that's measles, mumps, and rubella, the diphtheria, tetanus, whatever, the DTaP. And I just read an article yesterday. There's outbreaks, I believe, in the Bay Area of that this vaccine would prohibit or help against. And a lot of the kids haven't been vaccinated. And then chickenpox and influenza. And just, me personally, in the gay community in 2021, monkeypox started spreading around. And, my friends and everybody, we lined up and got some additional vaccines there. And then we have COVID-19. Jackie, comments?
Yeah, I was just going to say this chapter really hit me because of the COVID thing, because he obviously wrote it well before COVID hit. But then, he's talking about that being spread by animals. And I think we're still debating, aren't we, how COVID got spread, where it came from, and also where AIDS came from. And so we're like, it was just an interesting chapter to me about how those germs jump from animals to people. So it just kind of like it was it just got me because of the recent COVID pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, Landon.
Yeah, I always knew, that a lot of people died, a lot of the indigenous people died of diseases when the Spanish got here and when the New World came. And I always thought it was just because, they'd never been exposed to those diseases. But this book made me realize, because they had so few domesticated animals, I think in this book there was only 4. There might be more now that they say, but, and they didn't live with their animals. So they really hadn't been exposed to hardly any disease because they weren't living with their animals and disease wasn't becoming spread. And that's why it was so deadly to them when they came in contact with these others, because they hadn't been exposed to hardly any kind of other diseases due to the fact that they didn't have domesticated animals.
Yeah. No, it's interesting how they were talking about the domesticated animals of Africa, which are very few, because Africa has some really bad-tempered animals. Can you imagine trying to domesticate a rhino or a hippopotamus, which I think kills more people than lions and tigers and bears, all combined. That just by geographical and evolutionary chance, Africa didn't have candidates for domesticable animals, where Europe and Asia, the horse, the cow, the ox, some of those things were just key. The llama, they use llamas to carry things, but they weren't particularly suited to pull things. And they're kind of ornery. And so it wasn't like you live, right next to and in the same building as your llamas, as we did with cows, milk cows and stuff like that. So I thought that was interesting. And Jackie, your observation on, the COVID pandemic, boy, did that hit home. I mean, he wrote this, 20 some years before, and then you're going like, okay. And then you saw, at least my recollection is that it seemed to come and hit Washington State based on some people traveling from China, and then thinking that we could, all these 2-week lockdowns, you would, stop the spread of it. And yeah, it's very interesting. I think we've learned a lot. I'm older, 67, and I'm visiting family in Utah, which a number of my family don't believe in being vaccinated. And so I got my booster shot last week for COVID, just because I got it on vacation last year, and it was not super mild, but I wasn't anywhere near going to the hospital. I was sick for a few days. So yeah, the whole germs thing is really kind of very topical for today. Shauna.
I had it ready to unmute and then I lost it. I watched the PBS special that was done years ago. It was a 3-part special, and I thought that would be something worth, help me get through. I didn't quite make it through. He went to Africa, and he did a whole history of how the Dutch went to South Africa and then started moving upward, and how it worked in the opposite, where the as they moved up, and I can't remember which African nation it was, but as the Dutch moved up into Africa, he used a different name for them, that the Africans, the indigenous Africans, had the malaria issue was because they did not settle down by the water. They were up higher, and they had so the Dutch ancestors, well, not ancestors, anyway, I'm just call them Dutch. The Dutch settled down by the water, and they ended up with all kinds of malaria issues. And then and I'm probably just totally messing this up, but at some point now, one of the African nations is just, or as of when they did the video, is just can't get beyond, because they ended up, getting into communities, and there's a spread of malaria and all over the place. They can't get their economic base because kids are dying. So many kids are dying from malaria under 6 years old or 5 years old, and they're spending so much time and effort and money on trying to get this malaria thing taken care of, or that they just can't thrive as a nation. And I don't want to pile on with the church, but as I was watching that, I thought, why can't that is a more Christ-like thing to be doing for the church, to be going into a nation like that and helping whatever, and I don't know the ins and outs of how to deal with malaria. Exactly, Landon. That is exactly what yeah. I'm like, why are you fighting to build this temple here in Lone Mountain, Las Vegas, when you could spend that money dealing with this or similar type issues? It just makes me mad, and I have to back away because I can't spend my life mad. But anyway, that's what I have.
Thank you. I recall, and I don't have a medical background. I just read a lot of stuff that sickle cell anemia among Africans and African Americans. My understanding is if you have one of the sickle cell genes, it protects you against malaria. But if you have two, then it causes the blood problem of sickle cell anemia. And you can see biologically that the development of that variation in genes may, for the Africans, may have naturally developed in response to malaria. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Anybody else have any comments on the germs concept? I'm going to go to our next slide. Okay, yeah. Technologies, domestication of large animals, horse, ox, cow, water buffalo. Then the creation of wheels, wagons, and chariots. Chariots mentioned in the Book of Mormon, which didn't exist. Wheeled toys existed in the Americas, but they didn't even kind of develop into the wheelbarrow that Asia developed, allowing people to carry more with the use of a single wheel. And then the whole metallurgy, iron, copper, tin, bronze, steel. There was, some metallurgy in the Americas and stuff, but the technology thing, Joseph Smith describes in the Book of Mormon really advanced technologies that didn't completely exist in the Americas. And yeah, just kind of, it's not a description of how the world was. And then the advantages of technologies. And actually, one of the biggest advantages of technology is writing. They talked about the Spanish, record keeping and being able to transmit a large amount of information about how to conquer the different native people of the Americas and stuff. And, my understanding is in the Andes, there was kind of a communication system of a series of knots and stuff like that. But it wasn't something that was widespread. And even with Eurasian, well, especially Europe, when they started to print the Bible in the vernacular language of the people instead of Latin, where the people could read the Bible themselves, those technologies were, just life-changing, but those were commonplace in the 1800s. And so the narrative of the Book of Mormon doesn't match up with at least our current understanding of how the world worked. And so it's just further evidence of just Book of Mormon is Bible fan fiction coming up with a narrative that kind of was a good story to tell in the 1800s. Landon.
I was just going to say these technologies, they don't develop in a vacuum. There's things that are associated with them that you should find as a result of these technologies. So, for instance, if you live in the Western United States and you haven't been to Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, that is well worth the trip. It's probably the largest civilization, kind of, I guess, of indigenous people in the Americas. It was about 1200 AD. And it was amazing because they built all these large structures using large logs, but the closest logs were hundreds of miles away up in the mountains in Colorado. But you can still see the roads today that they use to transport those logs, and they're single trails because they carried the logs. They didn't have wide roads because they didn't have wheeled vehicles and they didn't have draft animals to pull them. So if you're talking about chariots, you not only should you find chariots, but you should find roads, and you should find wide roads, uh, and you should find draft animals that have to be used to pull them. And you're finding that we didn't have any of that stuff. We're not finding that stuff because it didn't exist, and they couldn't develop wills. There was no reason to develop a will when you couldn't pull anything, when you didn't have anything that could pull it anywhere, and you didn't have any roads, especially Mesoamerica, where you got so much jungle and that kind of stuff that was so difficult to clear. If anywhere, roads should have been in Chaco, and you don't find them because it's a wide open area that you could have easily built a road across, and you're not finding them. And you should find the to make steel, you need kilns, you need charcoal, you need the big kilns that you use to make the charcoal to get the heat, and we're not finding any of that. So it's not just a lack of those technologies, it's the lack of the supporting industries as well that's a big indicator that none of this stuff existed that he talked about.
Yeah, no, that very good point. Joe, are you driving safely? Unmute yourself.
I am. I'm parked. So yeah, something that stood out to me in another conversation was ephemeral writing. So basically, ephemeral writing is notes, taking notes, writing down, jotting things down. There's all this discussion in King Benjamin's talk and distributing things and all this other stuff. That didn't exist. There was no possible way of doing that, even with plates or whatever arduous way we wrote back then. Yeah, this concept just didn't exist, and that was kind of a kicker for me, is understanding like how people wrote and what it mattered and how expensive it was and everything. But yeah, interesting.
Great, thank you. Back to the slides. Okay, just some general comments. The spread of technology, when we move from being hunter-gatherer societies to settlements with agriculture, hunter-gatherer societies and small settlements didn't require a lot of organization. You know, sometimes you had the head person in small settlements, but you didn't need formal groups. You didn't need law enforcement. Everyone knew everyone else. There was all those kind of just cultural checks and balances. But as settlements got bigger, you needed government, you needed rules, you needed writing, you needed record keeping. And then once agriculture developed to the point where you had surpluses of food, it allowed for specialization, artisans, complex tools, leaders, the ability to support and maintain slaves, and more complex weapons. And so, you know, as we've read, like Landon mentioned, Sapiens, we read Who We Are and How We Got Here by David Reich on genetics that had many of the same concepts. Yeah, there's a narrative and a progression of how technology, writing, skills kind of developed. And I believe, as Brad pointed out, sometimes you don't lose everything, but sometimes you do. Um, it's interesting, having read some stuff about like the Black Plague, when whole villages were wiped out, and there were, at times there was not enough labor to even keep up the agriculture that they had. So that was kind of, I found kind of interesting. Um, Now this is from the kind of afterword that he wrote in 2017 for the book that was written in 1997, so 20 years later. And some of his basic observations were: countries with temperate and subtropical have better growing seasons for crops and less disease than tropical zones, and the Arctic zones have severe climate disadvantages. And Landon, you were pointing out, you could see where the crops and stuff were in the temperate and subtropical zones north of the equator and south of the equator. He also pointed out that countries that have access to oceans, seas, and rivers that go to the ocean had more access to trade. Europe has the Danube, and Asia has the Yangtze and the Yellow River, and a lot of Europe is along the coast, and there's a lot of countries that have coastal cities, and or, like in the case of like the Black Sea, large bodies of water for transporting things. And then he mentioned that cultures that have developed good institutions, governments, laws, codes of behavior, markets, tend to be richer than countries with bad institutions that tend to be poorer. And he lists inclusive political and economic institution, the rule of law, protection of property rights, and accountable government. And now, in looking at kind of from our point of view, good institutions don't necessarily mean it's good for the people that live there, but the organization. The Romans had somewhat good institutions, but they wielded really strong power against many people, and it was negative for those people. And even, when you have a king, um, the people under the king got the short end of the stick a lot, but they still did have rules of law that the king controlled, property rights that the kings and the nobles controlled, and governance that benefited the elite. But in general, the more good, in quotes, institutions, the richer the countries become. It's like Spain, in conquering the Americas, Portugal, the Dutch, with Indonesia and South Africa. Uh, it's hard to sometimes describe those as good institutions, but they did have enough organization that made them become richer, and countries that have bad institutions that don't function tend to become poorer. So, any observations on kind of that concept in how we how we kind of view what's going on in the world today? It's I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Landon? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. I was going to say, at the beginning, you said something about some of the criticisms of his book was that it was Eurasian centric,
Yeah.
which I thought, well, that's kind of dumb. If Eurasia has all of the all of the resources, they had the domesticated animals, the river systems, uh, then there's nothing wrong with saying they had a unique advantage due to their geography. And you can't just say, oh well, we want to stay away from Eurocentric or whatever. I think they did have the advantages. I look at um, the Netherlands. They became one of the world's greatest powers in the 1800s, and they're just this little tiny country, but they had rivers and access to the ocean, and they built navies and trade that nobody else could compete with, and they had good institutions. They had a banking system. They did all of that, and this little tiny nation became a great world power just because of that. The advantages that they had, and so I couldn't argue with his thinking there as I was looking at it. I was going, yeah, I can see some people have advantages and some don't. And it's not that one's smarter than the other. They just happen to be born or have they have it and others don't.
Yeah. Brenda.
A modern example is San Francisco Bay Area, where we have lots of technology centered here. A lot of people made a lot of money here. And part of that reason is because the institutions promoted it and allowed it to happen. And then also the geography of being nearby. If you're in the Bay Area, you have a lot more interaction with others to create more technology and software and things like that. So I would say that the Bay Area is just one of those ecosystems that, at least right now, or in the computer era, is quite rich.
Yeah, and there's a plug for our book next week that Brad's going to present on some of the social media things that will be part of our discussion later. I'm starting to read it. I'm getting a little depressed things, but yeah, no, it's interesting. And his afterword that he wrote in 2017, it kind of helped me reframe what I think is valuable in creating good institutions that are good for everybody, for society and stuff. Yvonne.
Yeah, I just wanted to say in support of what Landon said. I mean, didn't you and his saying why did his Diamond's critics say it was Eurasian centric? Because I felt through the entire book he was trying to show, trying to disprove that myth that persisted all through the 20th century that white men are superior, right? The white men somehow that civilization that conquered all the other civilizations, that God was with them, and that's the reason the Spanish felt like they had the right to conquer the poor natives, the whole Redrick. I felt like his book, Jared Diamond's book, was trying to dispel that myth, that everything he put forth was like, we're not more intelligent. We're not more blessed of God. These are the reasons why there's rich and poor countries and blah, blah, blah. It's complicated, yes, but it certainly isn't because Northern Europe, the Northern Europe race, or to go back to Hitler, the Aryan race, the oldest of us remember, how impactful that was, the Nazi doctrine and everything. But anyway, yeah, to just emphasize Landon's remarks.
Yeah, and going back to the book I presented last year on Genghis Khan and making of the modern world, for a very long time, the Mongols controlled large chunks of the world, and the horse warfare that they developed and coming in quickly and taking the horses and, using the horses for milk and, the advances militarily that they did and, psychological military stuff that he did. They controlled things for a long time. And I mean, just until 1948, the last of the descendants of Genghis Khan was still ruling part of India when the British overthrew them. So those are really long periods of time that certain technologies and systems dominated large parts of the world. I mean, they took over China, which was fairly advanced. They went down into Persia. And the thing I like to remember is they looked at Europe and it was so backward and crappy that they didn't go in and try to take over Europe because it wasn't worth it. So yeah, just kind of the stuff he writes about this in the book. How does that affect how we view our place in the world? It again, the book club gives me an idea of how the world works, and that's continuing to grow and develop. What do I think we should do? What do I think we shouldn't do? And stuff. And with a lens from Guns, Germs, and Steel, I think that's, adds a little piece of my understanding as to how the world works and stuff. So any other comments? Let's see. So back to Rebecca's very skillfully generated through AI graphics. The world has developed with a lot of things that have made major changes. Guns, Germs, Steel, have had major impacts. And anything else anybody would like to bring up? Any thoughts you haven't expressed or observations from reading this book or participating in the discussion?
Oh, I'm raising my hand, Bruce. I don't know if you can
see.
Yeah,
Rebecca, there we go.
Sorry. Yeah, I think exactly how a lot of you guys were raised. I think back to my parents saying everything happened for a reason. It was all set in place and you're special and, you have what you have because of something you did long before. To me, that was always a lot of pressure. This concept of foreordination, it was so prevalent when you were raised in the 70s and 80s church. Like there was no free will, there was nothing. And the more I, jump off the cliff into post-Mormonism and study it, I find randomness everywhere. But by random, I mean, it starts out random and then it makes perfect sense. Like a book like this, it doesn't have a meaning. Malaria, why did this happen? They settled here, they settled there. That set the course for that different group. It is random, but it means something. And I find a lot of comfort in that for some reason. I really enjoy books like this because it does help you put together, why things happened, but there was no design, no celestial meeting. It's just humanity and the world and science. And I, for one, just love it and find it extremely comforting. Maybe I'm weird.
Yeah. Melissa.
This book is one of those books that probably would have caused a lot of cognitive dissonance for me when I was still in the believing space. And I think that's one of the things I love about this group and being able to read these kind of books is I feel like I'm learning things that I kind of went 45 years of my life without knowing. And, because I couldn't see it and I couldn't hear it and I didn't want to know it because I didn't want to have to make it make space in my, belief system. So I just kind of ignored it. And so I love reading books like this that, clearly would have blown my brain away and as a believer. And so I just love it. And so Thank you for doing this, Bruce. I love it. Thank you.
Mylene.
One of the things that I really liked was, you pointed out, Bruce, was, if we had lived in the time when the Mongols had controlled the world, basically, would there have been newspaper articles talking about Mongols centrism, like we talk about Eurocentrism and stuff like that? It seems like a lot of these theories are time bound. If you keep going back and back and back, and you say, well, we all started out as hominoids in Africa, and then we branched out from there. Jared Diamond's basically saying, well, some of the people that moved to this area, they had less need for melanin, so their skin got lighter, and they had all these other advantages that were coming to them by the location that they moved to. It has very little to do with human righteousness or anything else. It's almost dumb luck.
Yeah. Yvonne.
Oh, I got it.
Yep, you're okay.
I'm unmuted. Okay, I guess yeah. So I just wanted to say, Mylene, I agree with that, and I did enjoy reading this book. It made me think though that back in 2011, my bishop found out that I didn't believe the Book of Mormon was historically true. It came out in some conversation I was having with one of his counselors, and of course, the counselor didn't talk to me, but he told the bishop. So the bishop, when I was going to get my temple recommend renewed, he kind of waylaid me and called me into his office instead of having me go to somebody else and said, I hear you're having problems with the Book of Mormon. And I said, I don't have a problem with it. I read it and I do the teachings, but I don't think it's historically true. And he immediately took my temple recommend away. And my husband, who was a BYU professor at the time, went in and read him statements from Joseph Smith about how, we don't have to believe. I just, and he, he didn't back down. He never backed down. And the story goes on, but that's what happened in 2011. And I just wonder if that would happen now. I think the church is kind of backing away from all of its hardcore, because it has to, right? It always retreats in the face of science and modern advancement stuff. And I don't know how far it'll go. They're still, whooping it up when they find evidences of the Book of Mormon, like that little gold plate discovery that they had. But I don't know. Do any of you think that would be a problem now, that if some member said, I don't think it's historically true, but I read it, I do everything. I mean, I was a very, very active and Mormon and so forth.
Right.
I think they're trying to move away from that, but they can't. Watch our Mormonish episode. What is it, Landon? Number 3, John Lindwall. It must be historical to give them priesthood keys, to have all that power. But I think they wish it didn't hinge on that, because I think that a lot of people could get away with just sort of, yeah, it's a good story, it's good meaning, it's good life lessons. And I think a lot of people are gravitating toward that. But think it through. There's a straight line. It must be historical to continue the Mormon narrative. So I think we'll see a lot about that in the future. My 2 cents.
Yeah, Nancy.
So the book, which I read, 7 or 8 years ago, and this was a great discussion, so thanks, Bruce. But it just brings to mind that history and the world and people are so complex. There's so many factors that go into the rise of civilizations, as well as each of our individual lives. But in the church, how I was raised, it was a very, very simple narrative. Everything was moving to the restoration of the gospel, to the first vision in 1820, the establishment of the church in 1830, and everything pointed to that. All the technological advances, the settlement of the Americas, the rise of computers, when that, computing power, when that started, all of those things were for the advancement of the Church of Jesus Christ. right? It wasn't because of all these other factors that we've been talking about. And it is such a myopic view, but also a very narcissistic view of world history.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Yvonne, you were talking about, whether believing the historicity of the Book of Mormon would be cracked down on as much. I kind of tend to agree, but this last week, the cracking down on wearing garments is a lever that they can exercise. I'm coming up to Utah in the middle of May for a great nephew's high school graduation. And my brother and his wife are going to be there. It's their grandson. And I'm going because I can see them, so I don't have to go to Colorado to see them. I'm going to be there for 9 days. Well, my nephew's wife, and we're pretty good friends. She last year told her bishop and stake president she wasn't wearing garments because they give her anxiety, and she's like a personal trainer, very fit, short shorts, tank tops. The kids, when I go to their house, all these little girls in sundresses and stuff that I'm going like, church lets you wear that? But she doesn't make her kids. And so I'm going to be very interested in seeing her reaction and my brother and his wife's reaction, because they're the only kids in their family that are still in the church. Everyone else has left. But the lever of garments seems to be pulled, but the lever of historicity and, I mean, it's like the Givens, don't they talk about, kind of just a very wishy-washy, that history's not true and they're still touted and everything. So just my thoughts. Nancy. See, Nancy, did you mean to have your hand raised? I didn't notice. Maybe not.
I think she had it raised before. Maybe she was done with her comment.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I was done. But Bruce, what you just said, I was thinking of as well, following up on Yvonne's comment, that what are things that the church can crack down on? They can crack down on wearing garments. They can crack down on paying tithing and attending the temple. If they can't get people to believe in that hardcore Book of Mormon, taking that literally, then, I mean, all the crazy things we grew up in with the church in the 60s, 70s, 80s, the three Nephites, all those stories. I don't know if you ever heard these urban, kind of like Mormon urban legends, right? About the three Nephites. I don't know if you hear those so much anymore.
Oh. Three Nephites helping you change your tire on a deserted
road. Exactly. Before the book club started, someone was talking about garments and the protection. We had a really sad situation in the ward I grew up in where a family was vacationing in Hawaii. The husband, who had a pilot's license, was flying a small plane and it crashed. Two of the four people in the family died, and two of them were able to get out. But the father, the pilot, didn't survive. And the story was everything burned on his body except where his garments were. And at the time, it was, of course, presented as a faith-promoting story, but isn't it a horrible story? It's really horrible when you think of, God could protect the person where his garments were, but couldn't protect his life. I know it's really awful when you think of some of these stories.
I just have to say, Nancy, that you mentioned the things that they can check you on in the temple recommend interview. None of them say that you have to believe in the Book of Mormon is true. And that was right. My husband immediately went, he'd been a bishop and a BYU professor, and he's like, you can't take your temple recommend away. It doesn't say that. And I truly did believe I was worthy anyway. Just to follow up on that, it's not in there. Maybe it will be.
Yeah, Mylene.
I was wondering, has something changed that I'm unaware of? Because it seems like when I joined the church and for the next 30 some years, there was this thing about the historicity of the Book of Mormon that both you and Rebecca have mentioned. And people were getting up at General Conference and saying, if the Book of Mormon isn't true, then the church isn't true, and all this other stuff. How can you get away from that?
I can tell you how.
I mean, that's worse than the Negro issue,
Yeah. No, it's because there are two kinds of Mormons now in the church and some in between. There's very orthodox, very literal, and there's progressive Mormons. I call them restore Mormons. They attend this giant conference that is once a year, and they're extremely progressive. They have personal revelation about not wearing garments. They pray to Mother in Heaven. They take the Book of Mormon as a book of wonderful stories about beheading that teach you life lessons. You know what I mean? And they have convinced themselves it's in order to stay in. You will do what you need to do because it's your community, your family, your life. Eventually, those things are going to butt up against. I feel this garment thing, the new crackdown, is butting up against that. And so there's this constant tension between the Orthodox and the progressive, and historicity of the Book of Mormon is one of those. They don't feel they have to believe it's historicity. However, as I said before, if you listen to John Lundwall, you follow that straight line. It must be historical for Mormonism to be true, but people don't let their minds go there. So I think we'll see more of it going forward, but there's definitely a group, very progressive, trying to stay in, trying to change the church, LGBTQ allies, people that think everything can change. And then there's the other side that says, oh no. So we'll see. I don't know.
David.
It just seems.
Go ahead, Mylene.
Go ahead, Mylene.
Well, it just seems so confusing because how much can you give up before you've, it's like, how many things can you take away from an image before it becomes a different image?
Yes.
David.
I was going to say, when going to the Book of Mormon question, when we were interviewing either in Ward or Stake for the temple, we were always told by our area authorities never mention the Book of Mormon because it's outside of the remit of the Temple Recommend interview. Clearly, that was the same people who considered bedroom talk was appropriate. But the interesting thing was when we were considering disciplinary outcomes, one of the very first things that we were recommended to provide to people who were on probation or disfellowshipment was to set them a Book of Mormon reading schedule or link their lack of faith to their lack of belief in the Book of Mormon. And that's when they first started going awry because they weren't reading the Book of Mormon. But when the thing that originally got me to put my hand up, the simplicity of this moving from Africa, this modernity, this progression, in many respects, I think we still are, or should I say the church is still in a very white supremacist perspective. English is the language of salvation. The ordinances, everything, it's all about English. I always like to say that when the Americans spell savior, it's different to most of the world because they take the U out of savior. But that's just a grammatical thing. But no, I'm pretty concerned that the church hasn't yet learned to be multicultural rather than many cultures.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
I just looked up the Temple Recommend questions because I know they've just changed just this week. And just to be clear, it says, do you have a testimony of the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ? So it's sort of implied, right? If you believe in the restoration, then you must believe in the Book of Mormon. It also says that you have to say that you believe that the prophet is the only person on earth that has the keys to the priesthood. So that's also, it's kind of implied, but it is not directly asked about the Book of Mormon, just the restoration.
Yeah, no, it's terribly interesting. I see evidence, on Reddit and with some family members, this real ultra orthodox view. But that's where you get the far, I guess, right, the Denver snuffers, and then all the craziness with the Chad and Lori Daybell, the 8 passengers, Jody Hildebrand thing, the ones from Arizona that took the kid, because he was the one great and strong. And then, we've done Under the Banner of Heaven and stuff. You get that kind of crazy fringe thing. And then we read Educated, that was a more extreme version of Mormonism, but not unfamiliar to me. I mean, there were those threads of how crazy Tara Westover's family was in my family, but it never went to the level of, outward craziness. I mean, I was taken to doctors in Mexico and stuff like that. My parents' belief in U.S. medicine at the time I was growing up, but towards the end of their lives, that they had operations and they followed their doctor's advice and you know and stuff. But that craziness, extreme Mormon um, thing was present in my family. It was just tamped down a lot. Um, I don't know what's anybody else's views on some of this stuff, because it's kind of crazy.
I find it interesting that the church will never make a statement about a Lori Vallow, a Chad Daybell, a Doomsday Mom, any of that. No statement condemning any of that. They'll just tell women to put their underwear back on.
But they did go against
Tim Ballard instantly
Ballard. Yes.
because he was harming one of the Q15, supposedly by affiliation. Yeah, they'll make a statement there, but they will never make a statement about, and if you look at it with Ruby Franke, children are being harmed, children are being killed, and they will never come out and say anything like, hey, you guys, stop it. This is not what Mormonism is. Not because they won't say it, because they know, like I talked about, half of their members, this extremely orthodox conservative branch, they believe that stuff. And they're still sitting in the pews and they're still attending the temple and they're still paying tithing. So they're not going to stop them, no matter how extreme and harmful their views and their actions become based on their views. They will never say anything. It's extremely, extremely infuriating.
Well, it would be interesting, at least, from Reddit and stuff I've seen, Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand, convicted and are in prison now. Have they been excommunicated?
Not that I know of. Isn't that interesting? We watched that and not yet.
Yeah, and Jody Hildebrand's kind of closeness with Tom Harrison and Brad Wilcox and some of the leaders of the craziness movement, the whole, Sons of Helaman. Actually, there was a really good Natasha Helfer podcast this week it was on male sex and stuff.
Good.
It was very good, and a book that I'm probably going to read. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, the world works different than it was described to me and taught to me. Brad.
Yeah, one thing talking about the Jody Hildebrand and stuff that comes up is the whole idea that I've been thinking about deferral of authority, or rather than like even thinking about Kevin Franke. Yeah. I mean, where was he, and why did he so readily say, yes, it's not in the best interest for me to be in the home. It's you take my children, it's best. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with the church is how it forces to externalize our authority and our deferral to authority and go somewhere else and accept someone else's authority, even if it is wrong to ourselves, that we say, well, we must be wrong, they must be right. And that's, I think recapturing my own moral authority was one of the best steps I ever took in leaving the church.
Yeah. And then, it gets back to bigger questions too. Okay, how do you engage with your Mormon family? I've kind of backed off, and kind of, when we talk about things, I discuss it in terms of best reasonable behaviors and reasonable beliefs. And we're all going to be dead in a few years. How many thousands of generations? When I did my DNA testing and it showed, like 180,000 years ago, I descend from a woman from East Africa, and 250,000, I descend from a man from someplace in Africa. And then how many countless generations come down, and, in the last few 100 to 1,000 years, it ended up in Northern Europe and Scandinavia and England and Scotland and Wales, and then, we get back to free will. Sam Harris, is most everything about our lives genetically encoded. That still kind of bothers me, that I think I make a lot of good free will, positive choices in my life, but maybe within some really narrow guardrails of what's possible. So I don't know.
I think that's true. I think that leads us into our next book almost, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think
maybe we should let Brad do his, it really fits. Oh my gosh. It's crazy. But first, before we get there, everybody, Bruce, that was amazing. That is a tough book. That is rough. And you did it and you presented it. And this is fabulous. This is one of our best discussions I think we've ever had. So good job, Bruce. That's right. Are you muted, Bruce?
No, I'm going to spotlight Brad.
Spotlight Brad. That's right. And we did pull in your slides, Brad. Okay. I think Melissa, somewhere. So yeah, Brad is presenting our next book, The Chaos Machine. Here we go.
Yeah, no, thanks for giving me this opportunity. I saw the list of books that we were talking about, and this popped up. And social media has been on my radar screen for a long time. When it first came up, and I got onto Facebook fairly early. It was one of those things that what's the catch? Like, it's too good to be true. How can this be free? Kind of like Google, and then what's going on? And then as problems started emerging and questions started coming up about how this was changing the world and changing ourselves, I've been wanting to research and dive deeper into that. And so this book came up, which is a great opportunity to do that. It has a lot of scientific and research and historical kind of things brought up, which is really helpful, and I just eat that up. But there's a quick video that we could show. There isn't a book trailer for this one, but the author has spoken in many different venues, on podcasts, on YouTube videos. And so even if you want to broaden your knowledge beyond just the Chaos Machine, or if you just want to get a quick overview, then I encourage you to watch some of those. But let's just play this video, and it's just a minute long, and then we'll talk about a little bit what we'll talk about in the book discussion.
It came through as an image. Let me see.
Oh, it didn't come through as a video?
Let me.
Well, we don't have to. That's okay if it didn't come up. You can go onto YouTube and just search for the author Max Fisher, and there'll be a minute-long video, just kind of a highlight of a podcast episode that he did. And then there are other videos as well that you can watch to just get more an idea where Max Fisher, what his background is and what he's talking about. But if you'll go to the next slide, Melissa, then we can talk about so some of the questions that we'll be talking about. There is definitely an LDS kind of Mormon experience perspective on this, and there'll be different things throughout all the questions, but these are some of the questions that I think are probably on some of your minds as well, just about how social media has changed our perception of how algorithms and science have driven what's gone on in social media. And this is particularly relevant where social media is the first technology that has touched us with AI and machine learning. So we may not be as aware of the machine learning aspects that Facebook has had, but this book does talk about it. Like even 10, 15 years ago, how they were some of the first large companies that were using machine learning to interact with humans. And so we'll think about that as AI becomes more prominent in some of our lives and our work. And then just even with the current environment, I think there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of concern about what's happening in the world and how social media has impacted that. And I think Bruce mentioned about how he's getting a little bit nervous and frustrated reading that, and it's definitely frustrating, but there's also hopeful perspectives as well. So it all is not lost. We're not going into a Road Warrior, Mad Max, Skynet, Terminator kind of situation necessarily. So there are hopeful things on the horizon as well in parts of this. But I think the money quote that talks about what this book says and what we'll talk about is just at the bottom. The platforms we use every day were changing us in ways we couldn't see, and we didn't understand. So we are different because of social media. Our culture is different, and we don't necessarily understand all those things now. But we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about our own individual experiences as well with this. So it's a great book, and I encourage you to read it and watch the videos, and even come and participate, even if you aren't able to finish the book, because there's some interesting information that's applicable to all of us.
Found the thing. Do you want me to play it real quick?
Yeah, if you found it, play it.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, thanks.
Let me stop sharing and reshare with the other thing because I'm not fancy
Oh,
enough right now.
Make sure you share sound too, because
yeah, hold on.
we
Let
won't
me
be able to
see.
hear.
Is there, yeah, see if it works, because there's some settings that I can set if it isn't working right. But maximize that and see if it works.
These social media platforms are designed over all else to maximize engagement. Well, you open up your Instagram or your Twitter and you think you're seeing your community. You think you're seeing your friends, your family, or you think you're seeing the voices, you follow the people you want to hear from. And when you interact with them, the feedback that you get in terms of what travels, what gets likes, what doesn't get likes, you think that that is feedback from real people. But these are overwhelmingly the choices of these automated systems that are deciding what's going to get attention, what's not going to get attention, because the amount of content that's on social media is huge and the amount of content you can see is tiny. So it can tell almost any story at once by what it pulls out and what presents to you and how it presents it to you. And it smuggles its choices through your community in a way that feels neutral, but is not. And in a way that has much more power to affect how you think and how you feel than you might believe.
I'm terrified.
No, but
I think anybody go to it as well. It's in the chat.
Yeah, I think this book, I started it a couple days ago and I find it disconcerting. I moved Instagram off of my home screen on my phone and thought, I'm only going to look at this crap once a week. I don't do Facebook. That was a previous choice because my crazy family is on Facebook and I didn't want to interact with them. But I think this is a really important discussion for our understanding of how the world works and our understanding of how the ex-Mormon world works, how the Mormon world works. Yeah, I'm very interested in the discussion we're going to have next month.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be awesome, Brad. We're so glad that you're leading it. This is going to be great. You're probably just going to have to revive all of us after we're terrified and freaked out. And, it is interesting that the church, Elder Gong and Elder Bednar, have both given devotionals and talks about the dangers of AI. And of course, we've had things from social media before, but specifically AI. And in both of their articles, they were very concerned about deep fakes, where church leaders might be portrayed doing something that they weren't really doing. Of course, then a few weeks later, General Conference last week, they portrayed President Nelson sitting in a red velvet chair when in reality he was in a wheelchair. You can see the side of the wheelchair right in the picture. So I'm not sure. It's another case of do as I say, but not as I do. But everyone's thinking about it and what it can mean. So this book is cutting edge and Brad's the one to lead it. So we're really excited. All right, let's finish out our slides really quick. If you have any more, Brad, any more on this?
No,
okay,
this is great.
Good.
Thanks.
This is great. Yeah, we're looking forward to next month. And if we all remember, it's the 19th. It's the third Sunday, not the second. So we can all enjoy Mother's Day, hopefully. So again, I wanted to mention that the Good Book Club is on audio podcast. If you've missed an episode or you want to catch up or you want to hear your own voice, you can search us wherever you find your audio podcast. And we are on YouTube, the Good Book Club for Post-Mormons. And again, we don't advertise this anywhere else except for to this group, but you can catch up on past episodes, especially if you're brand new. You can watch back. So that's really fun. Let's see what else. Oh, we also kind of run media on the radar of the Good Book Club. And that's just on Facebook where we throw up, and anybody can throw up onto it things that they see about Mormonism, post-Mormonism, anything that seems interesting, maybe things that we've talked about in book club before. So that's just a Facebook page that you can join if you're interested. Of course, Landon and I have the Mormonish podcast where we often interview a lot of you guys and bring up things that we've heard at book club. We tend to, sometimes we'll have a book club meeting. We're like, let's turn this into an episode. So we have a lot of fun over there. And that's just Mormonish Podcast, also available wherever you get your audio podcasts and on YouTube. If you are brand new and would like to really connect with the book club and you're not a member yet, oh my gosh, I'm telling people if you're not a member yet, you can find us on Facebook. Just look for that logo there in the Good Book Club, and connecting there is where we kind of all chat and put information. If you're not so much into social media, maybe after Brad the book, none of us will be, you can just email me at thegoodbookclub@mail.com and I will answer back on that and get you connected with book lists and links to things. And if you do email me, it sometimes goes quite often to spam. So make sure that you mark emails from the Good Book Club as not spam. I think our last slide actually is a can of spam. So there we go. All right. At this point, we're going to turn off the recording.